Hey there, it's Andile here, and I'm back with part 2 of my conversation with Christiaan Steyn. Now, Christiaan is the head of South African mobile-first car insurance startup MiWay Blink. MiWay Blink is a division of MiWay Insurance Limited, and the venture was launched in Johannesburg during the thick of the ongoing COVID pandemic. Now, on this episode, Christiaan lets us in on what it's really like to develop and launch an insurtech in the shadow of a large, successful incumbent. Now, he'll also paint a picture of what knocking it out of the park looks like for MiWay Blink as he and his team respond to the pressure to kill it. But before we get to all that, thanks to MiWay Blink for sponsoring this 2-part series. Their vibe is no paperwork, no long phone calls, just smart tech, great service, and cash back in your pocket. They're definitely fixing to be the car insurer that lets you have it all. So if you live in South Africa, they'd love for you to put them to the test. Go ahead and download the MiWay Blink app in the Google Play Store or Apple's App Store and request a quote. You can also do that at miwayblink.co.za. That's miwayblink.co.za. Now, on to the episode. Santam is proving to be, at least in insurtech, one of the more nimble and more innovative legacy players around resourcing and enabling corporate innovation that, is essentially startups within a large corporate. And it's definitely something a lot of financial institutions struggle to do. What made this possible? Because it feels like it's in the shadow of a Santam that MiWay has matured and become a confident business. And now it's almost like lightning is striking twice with a startup within a startup with MiWay Blink. What are you guys getting right?
I think there's, in MiWay, definitely a culture of, and I know it's become a buzzword and everyone uses it, but a culture of let's try things and fail fast. And that's really, with that mindset and being able to test new things, quickly ditching the ones that don't work, and then scaling the ones that do. So I think it's that mindset. We launched with just car insurance, and ideally we'd want to offer all the other products as well, and we'll get there. But I think our method or our way of working is to say, well, let's launch with something. Let's launch with a product that is big enough to suit a big enough market, and that we can get to scale. And let's keep improving and adding to it over time, as opposed to saying, let's go and build all the various products that we have on a digital platform, and it's going to be a 3-year project, and then we'll launch. And I think that makes a big difference, because it allows us to launch things iteratively and more regularly, rather than kind of betting the farm and then you take a big risk whether that's going to work or not.
So this is what fascinates me, that you get to think like that when you have Suits, no doubt, on your board. You're wholly owned by a legacy institution that got to where it was not thinking like that for the most part. Give me some insider scoops on what that looks like. Is it a negotiated path to progress, or is it inherent in the leadership or your ownership that this is what startups need to be allowed to do if they're going to succeed? How do you prevent the success of a legacy owner like Santam getting in the way of building something new and innovating? I mean, you guys bombed this out in a year. I mean, you're making it really difficult for some startups that are counting on players like you not doing this sort of thing, right? So I'm trying to get into the psyche of it.
I mean, it's interesting, but I heard a story this week about someone pitching an idea and saying, we want to launch this and give us 5 million rand for kind of as a marketing budget so that we can take this to the market. And this person was complaining and saying, but they're hesitant to give me 5 million rand, and he was speaking to someone else who got a 50 million rand marketing budget to also launch something new. Person B said, but what did you promise them for that 5 million rand? And they said, no, I didn't promise anything, because this is brand new, and how can I put any sales numbers behind this? I can't promise anything. We need to see what happens. And the other person said, well, that's the problem. I got the 50 million because I could, say that for this 50 million, this is the number of sales that I can generate for you. And it's also uncertain. And I think that's where it comes in. The reason I'm mentioning the story is, in MiWay's history.
Is this a real story?
It is a real story. But I think it's sometimes you have to put numbers on the table and say, well, this is what we'll achieve. And then, our boards, if the business case makes sense and if the rationale is there, then, they're happy to give us the extra funding to do things like MiWay Blink. But with that freedom comes the accountability to say, well, then we need to deliver. And if a particular project, let's just say if MiWay Blink didn't quite work out, then, that accountability sits on our shoulders to make sure that we come up with other plans that we, keep changing or adding or even reinventing if that's necessary. And not just to sit back and say, we tried, it didn't work, what a pity. I think a lot of it is about culture. And I think also because we've had a good track record, our board, it's never really an issue. If there's a good business case on the table, if the rationale makes sense, the conversation is maybe not as difficult as you might think it is.
Have you had to take a failure to said board? And how did they respond? Because that's the other dynamic of VC backing startups, right? There's this hopefully a great sense of accountability, which not all sort of VC startup relationships tend to engender. But there's also this reality that you are investing into a fairly, risky space, in which case failure is expected and isn't stigmatized. So are there risks maybe even that you don't feel free to take because you have that hanging over your head in a way that startup X in the market doesn't, because they've taken money from Munich Re and pedal to the metal, to succeed, where you have your board to sort of contend with?
So for example, if we decided tomorrow that we want to go into aviation insurance and we want 200 million rand, we're now going into aviation insurance. That's going to be a very different conversation because we're not experts in that field. It's not something that we've ever dealt with or have a proven track record in. I think if it's something different, if it's about car insurance, which we know well, we understand that value chain, and it's a play on, or a mix between car insurance and technology, and that's really where MiWay Blink sits. That's something that we know well, that we've been doing successfully for many years. So then it's very different. But to get back to your point about failures, definitely, and I think those conversations are more about, okay, but what failed and what do we learn from it so that we don't make a similar mistake again in future.
And so assume that a lot of the people listening to this show will probably only be hearing of MiWay for the first time in their lives, and perhaps even Santam for the first time in their lives. So how competitive is this field? One, what are you playing for in terms of the size of the opportunity? I mean, specific to the one you're going for currently, like before we talk growth and other plans you have. And what have you decided to do in terms of like positioning yourself in the market uniquely? So that's kind of three questions in one. Maybe let's start with the first one, which is, give us, paint a picture of who else is in the field, how competitive it is.
It is an extremely competitive industry. I think just, the competition on something like the keyword car insurance on paid search is, it's ridiculous. The bids that we have to pay if you want to rank high on keywords like that, as an example. But I think even just media spent by insurers to cut through the clutter and to have your brand kind of front of mind is very big. So Santam is the largest insurer, but then in the direct space, that would be Outsurance. And then you have King Price, you have Telesure, which have all the other brands. That's Auto in General, First for Women, Dial Direct, all of those. And then some of the younger ones, and that's really where MiWay Blink plays. So I would say MiWay Blink's direct competition are guys like Naked, Pineapple, Yashua. So those are all digital-first, app-based, not driven by big call centers to do transactions.
Or brokerage networks.
Yes, correct.
Okay. And so you were onto the distinction of like some of the other players that you listed, the Teleshow Group, which come from a legacy background. you think of yourselves really as a startup, I guess. I mean, is that how you segment the market internally, or do like a competitor analysis internally?
I mean, MiWay Blink at the moment is set up as competition for MiWay. What I mean with that is, if an existing MiWay client prefers to move his car insurance to MiWay Blink, then that's a client lost for MiWay and a client gained on MiWay Blink side. So the competition is not just those digital players that I mentioned. It's definitely in the bigger market. However, I do think there's a bigger element of competition between these digital brands just because it attracts the same type of client. A 70-year-old who's dealt with his broker for the last 50 years, they're not going to move, and that's typically not our clients. So even though, I don't want to say it's limited to just the other digital players, and we all, competing for a subsection of the market, I think it is bigger, but that would be probably the first level of competition.
Gotcha. And at Penny just dropped, MiWay Blink's existence is also, in essence, a response to disruption or potential disruption over time if MiWay doesn't join the party, as it were. Is that fair to say?
Yes, I think that absolutely.
So then, again, sizing the market, what are we playing for? Can you give me a dollar number? What would you tease a VC interested in buying MiWay with as far as an addressable market and how big it is?
So there are about 15 million people in South Africa between 20 and 35, kind of the market we're looking at. And while there's no stats specifically on vehicle ownership by demographic, if we just, our estimates, if we take those population numbers, look at vehicles on the road and number of vehicles insured and uninsured, et cetera, I think there are about 2.5 million vehicles, and that's really the size of the market that we're after. So, yeah, I would say about 2.5 million vehicles owned by 20 to 35-year-old, maybe 20 to 40, and that's the size of the pie.
Has MiWay ever had, regional aspirations, global aspirations? And if so, in which direction have those gone? And if not, why not?
There was a time, yes, where we were actively exploring other opportunities. I think it's worth mentioning that in Sanlam, so kind of the real mother company, they have quite a big emerging markets business, including short-term insurance. So even though Sanlam is a life insurer, in many other countries they own short-term insurers. So it was also looking at that and saying, well, there's no point in going competing with them in those territories. So either can MiWay complement what they already have there, or are there other markets where we would be better suited to expand into rather than the existing Sanlam structure. So where that process got us to is almost saying, well, let's understand what we do well in South Africa. And if there's another market that would allow us to duplicate our business model, then fantastic, then we should go and do it. But if there's, for example, the ability to control the claims process from start to finish, where the vehicle is taken to be repaired, which tow truck operator gets the instruction to tow the vehicle, all of those, it sounds straightforward, but that's a key part of our business, is being able to control that process. There were some countries where that ticked a lot of boxes, but then, for example, the insurer is not in charge of where the vehicle goes for repairs. And we never really got to a country where we said, we think we can take what we do here and be just as successful in that country, because the environment and the kind of the lay of the land is so similar to what we have here in South Africa.
Speak to investors who are very bullish on InsurTech. They're being sold, no doubt, very, very bullish stories about the potential for Pan-African growth. What would you say to them as a cautionary?
I think the InsurTech play, which is, I suppose, to a large extent a digital play, is very much based on integration and integration into different data sources, different systems talking to each other, etc. So maybe the easiest way to make the point I want to make is to use an example. We ask a client for their contact details, their ID number, and their vehicle registration number, and that's why we can give you a car insurance quote in less than a minute. But if you move into many of the African territories, those type of databases don't exist, where with an ID number I can pull all the other information that I need about a client to calculate an accurate premium. So that's already, that underwriting process is going to be more laborious because all of those integrations and data sources don't exist. So that's one example. I think also the extent to which you can integrate into your repairer network. So is there a way to get a status update of how, where are we with the repairs on a particular vehicle? It's now in the paint booth, or it's being sprayed, or it's now being assembled or disassembled. If you want to offer a digital experience where you'd never need to speak to anyone, then that type of information needs to be available on an app without a human having to pick up the phone to call and find out, etc. And to what extent those capabilities exist in the rest of Africa, I'm definitely not an expert on it, but from what I've seen, South Africa is definitely far ahead of most other African countries.
And so it might also explain why some of the more promising insurtech plays in the, say, car insurance space specifically, outside of South Africa, are needing to build, or deliver on that infrastructure solve as part of the startup development process, in addition to delivering on being a good digital sort of offering. And I imagine you guys would do the math on doing that in various markets and see whether it's worth your while versus double down on a fairly lucrative market like South Africa, right? So, I mean, in that context, if that's true, what is winning at this, like knocking it out the park over the next couple of years at the startup? What does that look like?
I definitely think there are opportunities for insurtechs in the rest of Africa, but I think the product offering will just look very different to what makes sense at this point in South Africa. So parameterization is a new concept, and it's creeping into new and very clever insurance solutions. And I think especially in the agricultural sector. So for example, instead of I'm a farmer and I need to now prove that because of drought, I lost my crop for this year, that insurance product can work on the basis that I've paid my premium up front, but I don't need to submit a claim. I don't need an assessor to come out or an agri specialist. The product is based on very detailed satellite images, and on that basis, based on the coloring or the discoloration, that's really, that's the trigger point. And if it gets to a certain level of, I suppose, brownness or just lack of green, that's the trigger for a claim payout. So I think there are definitely other clever solutions that might just, motor insurance might just not be the next big thing in the insurtech space in the rest of Africa.
How much of that blue skies thinking are you allowing yourselves as MiWay Blink right now in light of the opportunity you just sort of outlined in the rest of Africa, and perhaps, there are other opportunities locally you might look at?
It's a difficult one, to be honest, because in the beginning and you start designing and it's all blue sky thinking, and now when you're in the trenches and, it needs to be very deliberate to say, well, a portion of our time we still need to spend, and so let's take a step back and allow for that blue sky thinking and just, forget about constraints and resource and whatever, but kind of what's next? What's the next big thing? We definitely want to expand into the non-motor products that I mentioned earlier, but we want to do so in a way that is just as fast and convenient and transparent or simple than the car insurance offering that we offer at the moment. So, we don't want to do this very slick car insurance product, but then if you want to insure your building with us, we're still going to ask you 40 questions, and it's kind of all the same than what you're used to. So we want to do that, but in clever ways, and also finding other technologies that can assist us to replicate almost what we've done in the car insurance space.
And are you open to partnerships? Because maybe their founders listening who are going, that sounds like a partnership opportunity. Are you the kind of company that would engage another startup that's got some interesting tech applications you guys could integrate? Or are you guys trying to keep it all in the family, build it yourselves? What's your sensibility around that?
No, absolutely. I think that used to be our mindset. It's kind of, we do it in-house. We build everything ourselves. We know best, that type of thing. And I think with MiWay Blink specifically, we've pulled in a few external experts, companies, not individuals necessarily. And I think I'm very glad that we did. It's things that would have taken us longer to figure out, where bring someone in that's their area of expertise. So most certainly, if there's someone that has technology that they'd like to show us that can help us to achieve our goals, we'd be all ears.
Okay, so now you've piqued my interest. Like, what parts of your business did you partner with? Or is this all under NDA and we'll never hear about it? What areas are more ripe for collaboration in this genre in your world currently? So
we are the insurance experts, as an example. Our back-end software engineers, they understand our system, which is quite complex, very well. But when it comes to the user interfaces and kind of the UI UX, that's a space where, just because we understand our system and we understand insurance, that doesn't make us experts on UI and UX. So that's one area. The technology, and this is public knowledge, so I don't mind sharing it, but the technology that we've embedded in the app with the telematics technology that allows us to detect accidents and to track the trips, etc., that comes from a US company called Doesnt, and that's actually a three-way partnership between MiWay, Doesnt, and DSG, which is the South African partner. What I'm coming back to is, it's almost asking the question, is there someone else that's already learned these lessons that are better at this than what we would be, even if we spend a lot of time and resources on this? And 2 years down the line, we might still not have something in-house that's as good as what we can get access to currently. And that's, for me, the first criteria of whether to consider partnerships and outsourcing versus what you keep in-house.
And so what would you say is the number one thing that keeps you up at night about this business and its growth?
It is still early days, so there are definitely many sleepless nights. And growth is the one thing. I think there are other things that, if we figure out over time, that because we've built our own pricing models, which we're now 5 months in since we launched MiWay Blink, and if we figure out that we weren't as accurate as we thought, that's something we can fix over time. But you need to get the business to scale quickly before any of that even matters. So growth is definitely top of mind. That's what I spend most of my time on, is to find other distribution networks, other partnerships, to really get the MiWay Blink brand out there and get it in front of consumers' eyes.
That sort of speaks to the question I asked earlier, which is, what does success look like? Is there a number you're working to? Is it a market share number? Is it a user number? What are the metrics that matter? An
insurance company, and maybe I should say a direct insurance company, needs to get to scale before it can be profitable. Just because a direct model is typically all your acquisition cost is incurred upfront, versus a typical intermediated model where a percentage of every premium for however long that policy stays gets paid over to the intermediary. So in a direct model, there's definitely, we call it a J curve, but you kind of incur quite a bit of expenses before you get through and get to break even. And that policy count, it differs depending on what type of products and so on, but I would say kind of getting to between 30 and 50,000 clients, that would be the first big goal.
What do you know now about MiWay Blink that you didn't 5 months ago? That, if you had known, would have informed, your strategy bringing it to market?
some of the interesting learnings that we've had over the last 5 months that we definitely didn't expect was that people almost found the ease of doing a quote and just signing up a policy almost too good to be true. We've had people that say this was an amazing experience, but what's the catch? Because this is not insurance. This is not how insurance works. We've had other people who've taken out a policy. They've done the whole process, and then they'll make contact with us on WhatsApp or via the in-app chat and say, so when are we going to do the actual underwriting? Are you going to send me forms, or what's going to happen now? So, we really spend a lot of time to make it that simple, but we didn't expect that type of reaction to almost say, but this is so far removed from what I'm used to that I'm almost not trusting it. So that's informed a few tweaks and additions that we've had to make and kind of explainer videos, and so it was interesting insights, and it's not stumbling blocks. It's just something that if we expected that from the start, we might have approached things a bit differently.
This is actually consistent with some research a mate of mine looked into around the lagging adoption of digital payments in South Africa relative to other African countries where, things just apparently take off as soon as they're mobile and, payments related, where there's definitely a massive culturally ingrained sense of trust that South African society, particularly as they call it, quote unquote, emerging markets, which is the vast majority of the population, tend to have, and a traditional expectation around a friction or a reliable sense of import that's given to the process, right? So it's actually quite interesting as an insight that you guys would have picked that up. And I can only imagine that would be compounded if you weren't backed by a brand that people actually recognized. I can imagine that would even be less prone to be trustworthy in the mind of a consumer who was prone to be distrusting anyway. And so how important is the brand? How big a factor has the brand played to the coming to market narrative and potentially your success?
That was definitely part of the decision process when we launched to say, okay, so we know what we want to take to market, but how are we going to position it? Is it going to be just another product, a MiWay product? Or on the other end of the scale, are we going to go a new brand, proper startup, and there's very little association with MiWay. And I think the reason that we ended up with MiWay Blink, so almost a sub-brand, is there's a lot of credibility behind the MiWay brand. It's a 13-year-old brand that people recognize, that they trust. So we definitely wanted to make that association clear, that this is something from a trusted brand, but that it's new. So that's why it's MiWay Blink, and you'll see from the CI, the corporate identity, the website, it's fresh and it looks different and it speaks to a younger market. And that's how we ended up kind of between completely new versus just embedded into existing MiWay products and processes.
So you've been with MiWay for 11 years. The vast majority of that time has been as, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but as an embedded sort of executive resource. You are now embedded as almost like a founder type resource, CEO of a startup within the business. What would you point to as some of the most significant changes professionally as you've sort of had to take on essentially bringing a startup to market? How has your experience as a member of the team at MiWay, as an executive within the team at MiWay, changed during this transition?
So my background is actually an actuarial one. Most of my 11 years at MiWay I've spent as in the actuarial field and looking at different aspects of it, and then I took over our commercial insurance, so MiWay Business Insurance, and then later Blink. So it's been an interesting journey, and with every part of it, there's new learnings and so on. With MiWay Blink specifically, I think it's the you almost need to become a bit of a jack of all trades. I'm sitting in marketing meetings, and in the first couple of months, there were terms that I have never heard of, but quickly had to come to grips with, to understand that landscape, to understand online marketing. So it's everything from that to operations, to technology, to business strategy, and that's really what excites me about my current role. I think it's a great opportunity because there's never a dull moment, but also because it's so wide, and you sometimes need to quickly shift gears and almost wearing different hats from one meeting to the next.
Sounds interesting enough, and certainly wish you the best. Christiaan Steyn, head of MiWay Blink, thank you so much for your time, man.
Andile, thanks very much.
Now, before we wrap this mini-series, a big thank you to MiWay Blink for sponsoring this conversation, and cheers once again to Christiaan Steyn for sharing fairly useful trench notes with us. Now, remember, if you live in South Africa, the folks at MiWay Blink would love for you to put them to the test. Go ahead and download the MiWay Blink app in the Google Play Store or in Apple's App Store and request a quote. You can also do that at miwayblink.co.za. That's my with an I, miwayblink.co.za. Otherwise, thanks for listening. Take it easy, Africa.